This is Melissa with Practically Creative. I'd like to talk to you today about some sewing tools that I use in my sewing room. But before we get started, I'd like to ask you to click that like button, subscribe and share, and maybe hit the bell icon so you know when I put up new videos. Today I'm talking about tools that I use in my sewing room, and I have quite a few spread out here in front of me, so I'm just going to go through what's laying here. We're going to start with cutting tools. And you should know I have arthritis in my hands, so a lot of the things that I use are chosen because they make it easier for me to do things with my hands. I hope that you don't have those issues, but if you do, maybe these will help. First thing that I use is I have a nice pair of Fiskars Scissors, and these are great because they let you use your fingers and your whole hand instead of having to try to put your fingers into the opening of a pair of scissors. These spring back open after you make a cut, and they lock shut so that you can put them away and not have to worry about cutting yourself. These happen to say that they are razor edged, and Fiskars has a lifetime warranty on their scissors. So if you have issues with them getting dull, you can always contact Fiskars and they'll replace them. I also have a little tiny pair of embroidery scissors. These are from Ginger, and they're just small little snips. I use them for a lot of things, but the biggest thing I use them for is to cut around small items when I applique. These are great because they just require 2 fingers. You open them up, and when you're cutting out applique items, you move the fabric, not the scissors. So this works great for my hands. Doesn't leave me in pain after I use it. I also have a pair of surgical snips here. I keep one of these next to all of my sewing machines. These are great for cutting off little threads. They're also great for if you get a bobbin nest or you get a nest of thread underneath something, you just reach in there and clip it, and it just uses 2 fingers, so it doesn't hurt your wrist to use these. These are about $8 on Amazon, and I will be putting links in the show notes below for all of these items so that you can find them on Amazon or on Joann's if I didn't buy them from Amazon. This item you ladies might recognize. This is an eyebrow shaper. Kai sells a version of this. I believe they sell 3 of them for $10 roughly. The last time I looked up this link on Amazon, there were 54 for $10. I'll put the link for that in the description box, but this is great as a seam saw. If you sew together a seam and you have an error in it, you just take this and go down that seam, and it takes it apart way faster than even your seam ripper does. I also keep a pair of tweezers in my sewing room. I use these for a whole lot of things that I didn't think I would. They're great for pulling thread out from underneath your bobbin. They're great for picking threads off your shirt if you're like me and always end up wearing thread. I also use them when I weed vinyl that I cut on my Cricut, which we'll get to in a few minutes. But these are super handy to have, and mine happen to have a pointed tip. Don't know if you can see that on camera. And they squeeze together really easily, but they have a very tight opening at the end. The next thing I use is rulers. Now this one's great because it's small. You can maneuver it easily around your cutting mat, and it's 2.5 inches wide, which we all know is a very common measurement for fabric when you're cutting binding, when you're cutting squares. And there's a 1/4 inch measurement right here along this edge. You don't need an add a quarter ruler if you've got one of these. You just use that 1/4 inch measurement to check your seam, and then you don't have to worry about having an extra ruler floating around. Another thing that I use a whole lot is one of these. This is from Harbor Freight. This is a magnetic stick. It's great for picking up metal bobbins if your machine has them, for picking up pins off the floor, for picking up needles. I drop stuff a lot, and this keeps me from having to try to either get out of my chair and put a needle through my foot, or it helps me if I drop it too far out for me to be able to reach easily. Some other things that I use that are way cheaper than when they're sold by the brand is these. Acorn sells a pen. I believe the pen's $12.50 and a 2-ounce bottle of the starch for it. Adds up to $28.50 for the total. I keep Best Press in this pen. This one has a little brush on the end, and I can just apply the liquid to my seam. Excuse me. This one has a sponge on the end, and it's way bigger, so it's easier for me to hold and maneuver. I keep starch in one of these, I keep Best Press in one, and I keep watered down glue in one of these. I believe we got a bunch of these for like $11. Has a little sponge here on the end so you can apply it to whatever you want to apply it to. You can either run it down like it's a roller or just tap it on. And then you can iron your seams down so that they stay where they belong. And these are big enough that you don't lose them easily. This one works great for those 1/4 inch seams if you're doing foundation paper piecing. You could also use this one for glue basting if you're doing things like hexes and want to glue down the edges instead of having to hand sew those papers. I don't hand sew if I can help it, I promise you. This is a friction pen. I use this a lot for marking things on blocks. If I'm using a quilting ruler or if I'm using a Baptist fan, I can go in and mark with this on the fabric, sew the line, and then apply my iron, and heat removes this marking. Now if you're going to stick your stuff in the freezer, it'll bring those marks back, but most people aren't freezing their quilts, sorry. I also keep just a regular number 2 pencil, sharpened, and in my sewing room. I have one by every sewing machine again. This is great for if you're doing hexes, or if you want to mark something so you can sew down both sides of the 1/4 inch seam. Works great for half square triangles. You don't use the eraser much, see mine is perfect, but I keep this sharpened just so I can use it if I need to mark something quickly. Pencil usually gets marked on the wrong side of fabric, but pencil washes out very easily whenever you take your quilt to wash it. Okay, moving on to some other items. This is a traditional sewing tool. You use this if you're chain piecing items and you want to clip them apart. This is really easy for me because I can put it wherever I want, and as you can tell, has a little magnet on the bottom. This has a little sorry about that. This has a little magnet on the bottom so I can set it on top of my sewing machine and it doesn't wander away on me. The next item I really like in my sewing room is these little boxes. Hubby got these for me from Dollar Tree, and they are lock top snap boxes. They have little very secure clamps on the side. This one holds my clips that I use. I don't use pens a whole lot when I'm sewing, but I use the clips a lot. The box locks, so even if I knock it on the floor, it doesn't fall out, and it fits very easily right in the little gap of my sewing machine under the throat, so I can always find that box if I need it. The other one from that set I'm using for what I call my alphabet. We've all heard of alphabetties, you know, the A, B, C, D that you lay down on top of your block pieces so you can keep track of which one goes where. Well, those are $10 for a set, $15, I don't remember. What I did was I took a piece of paper and I printed out the alphabet inside little boxes, laminated the whole sheet, and then cut it out. And they store quite nicely in my little alphabet box. And when I'm cutting items for quite a few blocks, I can lay these on there, and I don't have to worry about where my alphabet came from or where it goes. That box also locks securely so they don't end up laying all over the floor. Let me move some of this stuff out of the way here so I can show you the next item that I use. Anybody who's ever worked in a restaurant has seen one of these. This is a receipt spike. Usually you use it to keep your receipt tickets on there, but I use mine to hold my bobbins. Whenever I make bobbins for my machine, I put all the full ones on here. This makes more sense for me than a box because I go through bobbins pretty quickly, especially if I'm doing free motion quilting. And I can stack, I don't know, 10 on here maybe. I can normally fill 5 to 7 at a time. And then I also know how many bobbins that I've used, so I know when it's time to change my, to clean my sewing machine. I do that after every 3 bobbins, and I oil it. And when I use the last bobbin on here, I clean my sewing machine and I change my needle. So this tells me when it's time to change my needle, and it's always visible for me. I bought a set of 4 of these off of Amazon for very inexpensive. Here's the other one. And this I use to hold binding. Now, this piece right here is nothing more than an old-fashioned pool noodle. I cut a piece of it that was about the height of my recipe, or my recipe spike. And then I covered it with some scrap fabric that I had in the sewing room. Works great for me. This spins easily whenever you want to use it. And what I've done, this is just for demonstration, but you can unwind your bobbin from this very easily, and this also eliminates having to iron binding. I put my binding down here at the bottom, I fold it in half, and I wrap it around this piece of pool noodle. I can wind it right up, and as long as I keep my edges even, when I clip this together, it automatically folds my binding for me and I don't have to iron it. I learned that one from a subscriber. Thank you very much for teaching me that. I believe it was Sandra. And this actually has worked out great for me whenever I go to put binding on, because I can set this, it'll hold a ton of binding too, several sets if you want to. I just set it beside my sewing machine. I start feeding my binding onto my quilt. Works great. I'm not chasing binding on the floor. I'm not worried about running over the end of the binding with my chair. So I can actually get up and walk away while I'm putting binding on my quilt, and I don't have to worry about getting tangled up in the binding. I also have a couple other things over here. We're going to start with this one. This came from Harbor Freight. It is a magnetic mechanics tool, and I use it to hold the metal bobbins that I've emptied, a few sewing pins for what I use them for, and I keep my free motion foot for my Juki in here. It isn't practical to keep it put away in a box because I pull this out and use it all the time. And this sits right on top of my sewing machine and doesn't go anywhere because it's magnetic. And this item and this is a school pencil box. Now you'll see it says Juki 2010 on it. That's because it goes to this machine that's sitting right here. I have one of these for every one of my sewing machines, and I always put the little envelope that comes with the machine inside this box. And these are great because this holds my walking foot, which I don't use very often. It holds my extra bobbins. It holds my extra feet that I use for my machine. I've got needles in here. I've got a little pen in case I need to write something down. And I have an X-Acto knife. I use the X-Acto knife for making bags, like purses and stuff. Whenever you want to install the hardware, you need to slit through the fabric or the vinyl, and that works really well for that, but I don't use it every day, so it just needs to be put away where I can find it. More needles in here, and then more extra bobbins. So that box works great. I got these on an awesome sale at Walmart years ago. They were like 10 cents each, and I think I bought 10 of them. I haven't used all of them up yet. This is another little item. I paid a lot of money for this one. I paid, I think, $10 for this little kit. It's a little velveteen bag. and it's a polish kit from So Very Smooth. I think I paid $10. If you're interested in one, you can go to www.soverysmooth.com. I'm sure they'd be happy to sell you one. This has a little piece of microfiber cloth in it and a little container that has polish. I have used mine quite a bit and I haven't used up a whole lot of it. But what's in here smells just like turtle wax. So if I ever use this all up, I'm not going to buy another kit. I'm just going to put a tablespoon of turtle wax in it and continue using it. But the microfiber, I have microfiber cloths around here. Had I known what was in it, I probably wouldn't have bought it. But it works great. Keeps my Juki shining and pretty, and keeps my table for my Juki smooth and silky, so that whenever I free motion quilt, things slide across it easily. Another thing I use a lot of in my sewing room is regular school glue. It's washable glue. If you ever do any kind of applique or piecing and you don't use Heat and Bond Light, this works great. You can put some glue down and use it to hold fabric down. You can water it down and put it in one of these pens to use it for the same purpose. So glue is super handy to have in your sewing room. The other thing is make sure to close the top of your bottle when you use it, otherwise the glue won't flow. And last but not least, one of the things that I've really liked in my sewing room is my Cricut. I had put it away and hadn't used it for a while, but I've pulled it out recently and I've been using it for a lot of different things. Cricut's design space has quite a few quilt patterns already in it, so that you can cut out things like hexagons, 2.5-inch squares, or bigger squares if you need them for something. And I have been experimenting with putting my rulers into my design space. For example, I have the rulers for the double wedding ring, and those are a little fiddly to cut. Either you have to do them with scissors, or you have to be really good to cut those angles with a rotary cutter. I've been using my design space to cut it, and since those are applique, I apply Heat and Bond to the back of the fabric before I put it in to cut. I go ahead and cut the pieces that I need, and then I can just apply them with an iron. Saves me a whole lot of time and hassle trying to get everything put together. So the Cricut's a great thing to use. I also am working on a chicken salad quilt from Lori Holt. I've uploaded all of my shapes, my So Simple shapes, which I did buy the shapes. I've uploaded them into my design space, and then I just put the fabric on the pink cutting mat and cut out the items I need, which saves me having to sit and cut around all those little curves at one time. I can do them with the Cricut, and everything is cut perfectly. It's cut to the right size, and then all I have to do is apply it to my background pieces and then do the applique work around on my sewing machine. Saves my hands a whole lot of trouble. And then last but not least, the most important sewing tool in all of our sewing rooms, as we all know, is a nice cup of coffee or tea or a big glass of water. So make sure you hydrate while you're sewing. I appreciate you watching my video today. Again, if you like what you see, please feel free to subscribe, like, share, and hit that bell icon so you know when I put up more videos. Thank you for watching. This is Melissa with Practically Creative. Have a great day.